Hey, it's Kevin Deutsch here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. In this session, we're going to continue on our little saga with iZotope Ozone, and we're going to check out the EQ section. So we've gone through the overview of it. We've got some fundamentals of the actual plugins, and now we're going to check out the individual module. So the EQ module is extremely powerful. It is very well designed for mastering and can do extremely surgical style EQ as well as normal style EQ as well. So it's very, very powerful. You know, you've got lots of bands to play with. You've got a really detailed display. As I said, you can go into a sort of a digital or analog mode. You can go into a very surgical mode. You've also got your mid-side processing if you'd like to go down to that realm. And there's really not a great deal that you can't do with this. And I use it quite a lot on mastering sessions of when I need to actually do some EQ. I like using this one. So I'm going to show it to you in the actual main plugin component, but if you have the advanced version like I do, then you can actually load the EQ section individually as its own plugin, but we're going to keep it within Ozone because that's the point of looking at all of this. So the other thing to keep in mind is that this EQ is works either as a regular EQ or can actually work as a linear phase EQ, and that's why it is extremely popular for mastering as well, so that you don't have any phase impact with your EQ cuts and boosts. So anyway, let's get into it and let's check out the EQ module of Ozone 8. All right, so here we go. We've got Ozone open and I've just put it on a track and I've just put it on the main bus out for this instance here, just sort of pretending as if it's a mastering session, but it's still in the mix itself. Now we've obviously covered off the main components of Ozone, so I'm not really going to go into that. We're just going to concentrate on this module. So you can see I've only got the Equalizer module on. And, you know, if we had other modules, we could drag this around. We have some presets. We can solo this module. We can obviously remove it. And we can turn it on and off, which is basically bypassing it. You can see we've got a graph here. And at the moment, we've got some noise going on here. And that's because I've got sort of analog processing plugins on. So they're causing a little bit of noise there to simulate analog hardware. But you can see there we've got 8 bands, and each of the bands can be adjusted to different functions. So we've got our first band, we can switch between high pass, low shelf, bell, high shelf, low pass. And then we've got different ones in between each. So that's going to change our shape of what we're doing. We've got an analog and digital component here. We've got this matching component. We've got a surgical mode here. So here we're going to go into really great detail and it's going to change the way this EQ works to be very, very surgical. We can change our graph. So we can just have just the waveform and the controls, or a different set of controls. I usually just leave it in this setting. It's the way I like it. We've got our standard stereo mode. We can go into mid-side and adjust our settings for that, or we can go into a left-right. So let's just start with checking out our basic controls here. So already, even as we've got it, I've got the first band here. It's set to a high pass. So at the moment it's set to flat. We can change our Q here. So you can see we've got a 6, 12, 24, or 48. And depending on what we pick, changes what happens. So we've got this brick wall. which you can see here is a very, very flat, and you can't change the Q anymore. When we go to brick wall, it's just a boom, brick wall. We've got a resonant here, and as you can see, the picture indicates that we can get some resonant bumps there. So that's going to change based on the Q. So you can see I'm changing the Q by moving this little thing here, or you can obviously change it here as well. So we can change values in lots of different places. So we can obviously change our frequency here. We can change our gain here, not on this setting, but we can normally. Or we can do it here. So we can grab the big dot and move it, which changes our frequency, or I can grab these little dots, which changes our Q. And if we were in another control, like say this one here, I can drag it up and down, which changes our gain control. Okay, we can turn each of these bands off. So any of the bands we don't want to use, we can turn them on or off. So let's get back to our band 1. So you can see what we've got in different styles of high pass. And if we go into a low pass, and let's just take this up here, because we can show pretty much everything on this one control. We've got similar settings there. So if we've got flat, we've just got your standard Q. We've got the resonant again and the brick wall. Now, while we've got it up here, if we go into a high shelf, we can again take that up. We can adjust the Q, but again, we can change the settings. So that's an analog. We can go for a vintage, which is very wide. We can go for a Baxendall, or again, a resonant. So depending on the Q, will depend on the amount of resonance and a little dip there. So that's giving you a nice little effect there. And same effect again on the low. So you've got the analog, vintage, Baxendall, and the resonant on the low. If we go across to our bell now, we can just move it around. We can drag it up and down. And again, we can change the Q for our width there. Very similar to any other EQ. So we've got a peak control there. We can go for a proportional Q. And what that usually means is that the bigger the cut or the boost, it proportions the Q appropriately. So the higher you get, the narrower the Q gets. Whereas opposed to a peak, you'll see it's very wide. If we go proportional, it comes in a bit narrower. But it depends on the peak, and that's why it's proportional. So the lower you go, the less change there is in the Q. The higher you go, the greater the change in the Q. So it becomes narrower. It's supposed to be a bit more natural sounding. And then we've got a band shelf, which gives you that little sort of flat top there, and you can change again the Q, so you can do a very wide band cut. So if you want to impact a lot of frequencies but not have that obvious peak or obvious dip, then you can sort of flatten it out there to cover a lot more frequencies at a more even level. Okay, so where it can change now is that if we go over to digital mode, so this has all been in analog mode. So the analog mode there is supposed to simulate classic analog EQs with adding a little bit of color to your sound and that sort of thing. And if we go across to digital, we remove that coloration and we start to get into its more precise, clinical sounding, very clean, and doesn't affect much at all. Now, you'll also see when you go into analog, you can't do surgical mode or change the phase relationship. But if we go into digital, suddenly we can switch into surgical, and we can also change our phase control. If we just switch between analog and digital, there's really no difference there at all. With our phase control here, as soon as we switch over to digital, we end up at 0% phase, which is, as it says on the tooltip there, we are in linear phase mode. Now, if we go all the way across to 100%, we're now back to our standard minimum phase, as most EQs are, and we can go anywhere in between. Okay, so I generally just leave it on linear phase, but I'm sure somebody out there very technical can tell me why we should be adjusting that. We can have a bit of a play with it in a minute to see if we can hear any difference, but we may not, we'll see. And we can also turn on surgical mode here, and what that does is, so the manual states that it changes the filter curve to be less musical, but far more precise. So we can see as soon as I click it on, it changes the shape slightly. And if I go into a positive mode, again, you'll see it changes the shape. So, and it does that, you can see that on each. So on each of them, suddenly it changes the shape there. So that's the big difference between that. So surgical can give you a lot more accurate. So if you know what you're listening for, it can be more to what you think it should be. But then obviously not surgical is a little bit more musical, a little bit more common. So let's just have a bit of a play. So we've got a song here, and let's just turn that off. So we'll just run through the EQs a little bit, but obviously an EQ is an EQ. We don't want to go into exactly what each component sounds like, but we'll check it out a little bit. So obviously our filter can do whatever it likes. So you can hear what a resonance does. Obviously boost there, cuts this low end out. It's really good for highlighting bass parts. So if you were to target the low end fundamental there, you clean up the mud below it or any rumble, but enhance where the fundamental is. So you can see here the fundamental's sitting about here with this bass. That's where it's playing most of the time. So you could target there. That's obviously boosting quite a lot, but it's also cleaning up this low end here, this part here that's unwanted, and boosting our main component there. So that can be handy in that regard. And a brick wall I wouldn't think would sound too natural, so I'd be careful with that one. So we can obviously switch to low shelves. Change our cues, cuts, change the style. Again, similar approach with the other one. If you find the fundamental of the bass, what you can find with the resonant one here is that you get a boost at its nice fundamental there, but you also make a dip in the next spot up, which could be and is quite common for where some mud would be. So it's a very good EQ for that. So you clean up the mud that's here while boosting fundamental. Obviously you don't need to go that extreme either. Then we've got our standard bell. Change to proportional. And then we've got our high shelf, switch that around, go to the other side. And our low pass. Again, similar ones. Alright, so let's switch over to let's just go with this band pass here. I just want to do something fairly obvious that we're going to hear. And just going to switch over to digital, see if we can hear anything obvious difference just between the two. Digital seems a little bit more subtler to me because, and I'm guessing it's because it's not adding that analog coloration to it. It's hard to get a clear example of it because there is that pause between switching, and the reason there's a pause between switching is because we're suddenly going into a linear phase and that, so there's an actual delay that gets imparted into it, and more latency is added to the plugin between the two, so we get stuck there. So let's just stay in digital mode now, and let's just have a play with the phase and then check out the surgical mode as well. So while I'm sure it actually does something and there's a reason for it, I'm not exactly sure the best way to demonstrate this, but I can't hear an obvious difference right there, changing that setting. But unless there's a reason not to do it, linear phase is quite common to be used in mastering, but doesn't have to be, okay? So let's check it out, surgical mode now. Okay, so as soon as I turn on surgical mode, you can see there, we do get some changes, okay? So when we go into surgical mode, all those other features disappear. So if we turn it off, you see you've got all of these other styles. And you'll see that as if I had it in a band shelf, as soon as I go into surgical, we just end up in a standard sort of bell shape here, or for a high pass. Again, we just have a Q setting. We don't have those extra features anymore, and that's because we're in surgical mode now. We don't need any of that sort of analog or digital pretending to be analog type features. We have been very surgical. We just want to do these cuts or whatever it is. Okay, so that's our EQ settings there. We'll just turn that off just for the point of this here. Might go back to analog as well, just for fun. All right, so let's just check out the other settings now. As I said, we can do mid-side or left and right. So if we check out left and right here, suddenly we can be affecting one or the other. So we have on-off, so we can actually turn one side off, one side on. If we click on the name, we can then be adjusting which one we're adjusting. So it says right, it says left. So at the moment, that's only affecting the left. We can lock the two so they'll both get the same moves on them, and we can solo each one individually to hear what we're doing. So you'll see here at the moment that as soon as I changed it, that EQ mode just went to the left. So you'll hear that's only happening in the left ear there. So we can solo. Didn't hear the right. And the off button here is, it's not actually turning off the left or the right. What it's turning off is the processing. So at the moment, we're only affecting the left, but if I turn that off, then it will go back to default. Okay, so that's left, right. So the other one is mid side. And again, same controls over here, but obviously now instead of left and right, we've got the mid and the sides. So the sides is going to impact both sides, okay, whereas the mid is going to focus on the center channel. So we could do a boost in our center if we wanted to bring, say, the vocal out a bit without impacting the left and right, the sides. So this is definitely a feature that's quite handy in mastering, because sometimes you need to make some EQ changes, but because you're working on just a single stereo file, you lose some ability to what you can adjust. So if you wanted to enhance just the vocal, and you know the vocal's sitting mainly in the center, then you could do some changes on the mid. That way you're not affecting the sides. Or if you wanted to brighten the sound up without making the vocal in the middle harsh, you could actually put a shelf or something on the side, so you start to bring out some of the side instrumentation and sounds, and it will give you more of a stereo feel as well doing that. So to give you an example of what you're hearing, if I solo it, that's the mid, that's both, and that's the sides. So if we want to enhance the mids, or as I said, if you wanted to add a bit more sort of top end sheen to the sides there, we could do a boost like this. So, and we only do it on the side. So you can hear there it's brought out the acoustic guitars, made them a bit louder. That's what it was. So, as I said, the advantage to that is you can make the song sound brighter, more clear, bring out the guitars that are panned fully left and right, but without affecting what's in the middle. So the vocals would not be brought up, the vocals would not be made more brighter. So definitely powerful there to use that mid side, especially in mastering. So let's just go back to stereo here. And the last feature that we have is this matching control. Now, I don't actually really use this feature, but I do use this feature in mastering, but I don't actually use it. So what I mean by that is that I use it to compare, say, a reference track to my track, just to give a visual check so that I'm confirming what I'm hearing with my ears is correct. You know, sometimes our ears go a bit funny, time of day, what we've been listening to. So sometimes it's good to do a bit of a visual check as well and just reset things. Now, when I say I don't use it, is I don't actually use the plugin to do the matching for me. I just use it to do the comparison. Right. So what you do when you're in matching mode here, so you've got everything set the way you want it. What you want to do first is you want to capture the source. So we're going to say start. So we just click on matching to get into the window, and then we've got this capture clear, okay? So what we're going to do first is, so this is our song that we are working on, right? We're mastering it or mixing, whatever we're doing. And what you're going to do is we're going to first off start by doing a capture. All right, so I'm going to play the audio. So we press capture and I'm going to play the audio. And we let it play for a little while because we want it to build up an average of the EQ. Okay, so you want to give it a little bit of time, make sure that it's hearing most of the instrumentation, hearing the vocals if we had vocals going, and that sort of thing. It starts to paint a picture. You can see it's slowly moving things. When it comes pretty stable, we know we're fairly accurate there. Right, so I can click stop now. Okay, now if I wanted to start that again, I could clear it and do another capture. So that is our frequency waveform there of this song. So what I would generally do in mastering is, as I said, I don't use it to automate it. What I use it to is to compare. So now that I've got that snapshot, what I could then do is play a reference track or another version of this song. Like if I wanted to compare multiple versions of this song that I'm working on with different EQ settings and totally different tones or something like that, then I load that up and I make that play, and then I can do another capture. So in this case here, I'm just going to open Ozone 8's Equalizer before this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some changes, just really weird stuff, okay? I just want it to be really funny, sort of big changes here, okay? So we've got a couple of big changes there, right? So it should sound pretty horrible. All right, so now that we've got that there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture it again. So just imagine that this was a different version of the song, or if it was a reference track that we were loading. So I just click on capture and I click play. And we let it capture that. Quite as extreme as I was hoping. Let's just do that one more time. So I'm just going to stop that. I'm going to clear it and just capture that again. So you'll see there there's a little bit of a difference. So you can see there's more top end there. It's a little bit lower there. I mean, it's obviously pretty close because it's the same song. And we've got a bit more low end on this song here. Right, so normally what I would do is that would be the level I would go to. I would look at it and I'd go, okay, yeah, I think I need to lower the bass a little bit. Or I could look at it and go, you know what, actually, no, I like my song with more bass and it's not that far off. It's fine. Or we need to lower the top end a little bit, that sort of thing. And then I'd go and adjust it and I would just turn this off. That's what I would do. Now, the other things you can compare to is you can compare to pink noise or a 6 dB guide. So we'll look at that in a minute. I just don't want to lose this setting at the moment. But what you can do if you really want to do it is that you can turn this on and then you can let it make the adjustments. Okay, so it's defaulted to a smoothing of 50% and an amount of 10%. Now, if I go to 100% with 0 smoothing, so it believes that's what the settings it needs to do to get these to be the same. And with it turned on, it's going to do it. Now, I would never suggest that you do a smoothing of 0 and amount of 100%. Okay, because this is what we're going to get. going to get very unnatural sounds there. So even if I left it 100%, if I change the smoothing, you'll see that it starts to smooth it out. So it's going to be a little bit more natural. You know, you could smooth it out 100% and that's pretty much going to do nothing. But you might want to go, 50%. But then you might want to also reduce your amount, because we don't want it to be 100% perfect, but you might want it to try get a bit closer, okay? So obviously the feature's there to do that. It's not something I use. As I said, I prefer to do it manually myself. But you can compare to pink noise as well. So you'll see we go to pink noise, we've just got a flat line like that. Okay. And this is now indicating what it believes needs to be changed to get to pink noise. It needs to do a giant boost here and a giant cut there and all of this squiggly stuff to try and get it flat. But if you did that, it would sound like this. Not very pleasant. Okay, so first off, you're going to want to smooth it. Second, I really doubt you're going to want that much amount. So this is attempting to get it to this pink line here, which is in line with pink noise. That's what it was. That's what it is. Okay, the other way is the 6 dB guide, which you can see there. If you look at the line, so the pink line, and it will turn to gray, you'll see it's very similar to pink noise, but dips a bit more off on the top end there. So again, if you wanted to go full 100%, that's what it believes it's going to do, which is going to be horrible. So let's smooth it out, drop it down. So you can see that our waveform here, the yellow one, our original one, sort of does go in line a little bit with what the 6 dB is doing, but it's further down here and it's not exactly in line with that. And you've obviously got a boost here off the bass, but some people like that. We don't necessarily like a flat line. So it's not always the best way to do it. I prefer, if I was going to do this, to do a custom and load a reference track, because reference tracks we obviously know sound great. If they're on the charts, they're out there, they've been done by professionals, they sound good. Why wouldn't we? But you've got to pick the right one. And that's the other reason that I don't use this feature here, because sometimes it might be obvious why there's a difference. Okay, your track might be brighter than theirs, the reference, or the reference may be brighter than yours, but when you actually look at it and it shows that it needs a boost here, it might be obvious because your song might be dark, it may be an acoustic style, it doesn't have a hi-hat or a tambourine or a shaker, whereas the other song may have one. So it's got that constant high-end shish sound. And the EQ is not going to be able to know that and adjust to it. So that's why I like to use it as a visual guide, but then at the end of the day, I make the changes that I believe need to happen, because again, I may not have an element in the top end, so I don't want to boost the song anymore because it is bright, it sounds bright, it just doesn't have that at the top that isn't there. Or I may have a big thumping low end kick that I want, and the song that I'm referencing doesn't quite have that kick, and I know that, so I just go, okay, I need to bear that in mind, that my my low end is going to show higher around here than the reference song. Okay, but again, the matching EQ can't compensate for that. So feel free to use this matching if you want to, but I would be subtle about it. And as I said, I prefer to use it as a bit of a visual guide, and then I go back to my EQ and make my adjustments. So in this case here, I would look at that graph and go, oh, I've got too much low end. And I would bring that down. Oh, I dipped a bit of that mid out. And we can see what I obviously did. Oh, we've got a little bit too much top end. And I make an adjustment to an EQ. Then you could capture it again and make another comparison. All right, so that's the matching feature there. So that pretty much covers everything in the EQ section of Ozone. So there you go. There's the EQ module in iZotope Ozone 8. As you can see, it is an extremely powerful EQ. It covers pretty much everything and it sounds fantastic. It is crystal clear, really does not have any sort of impact from a sonics point of view onto your sound. And that's why it's great for mastering. Just keep it in mind that if you are going to use it in a mixing session, that the more of the surgical and linear phase options you use, the more impact that's going to have on your CPU, and it is going to start introducing high latency and start to drag your CPU down. So while it can be used in mixing, it's not always quite common to use it, and if it is, use it in a more simpler fashion than using the high detail of it. But definitely for mastering, it is a go-to for me. I use it pretty much all the time when I need to use an EQ. And yeah, it's fantastic. So check it out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. You want to make an observation or let me know what you think of it, then again, leave it in the comments. Love to talk to you. Hopefully it's been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.